There was one movie I was forbidden to watch for the longest time. The notorious tale of a young girl overtaken by a demonic entity. As a child of religious and Hispanic background, well, that sort of thing is casually passed off as plausible. It's easy to see why, without even watching the film, it became a sort of boogeyman, where the mere implication of it imprinted on my young, overactive imagination. Nefarious scenarios keeping me from enjoying a good night's sleep. It was the fear of an invisible threat, randomly invading your body, forcing you to become a hidden passenger while it delights in your self-inflicted pain. You become a paralyzed and unwilling witness to the destruction of who you are. It wasn't until later on where the marketing taglines of scariest movie ever made started to dissipate, and I was able to find a true appreciation for the storytelling and success of the film, one that sets itself apart from other movies that try to emulate its influence, following a now well-traveled path with limited surprises as to what possession horror movies can offer. A character is taken over by a demon, ghost, or what have you, evil then ensues, a preacher or religious figure appears, the ritual is performed, and then the spirit goes away. Or if you're trying to be clever, maybe it doesn't. How can one maneuver the formulaic pitfalls? What separates The Exorcist from the rest? I think they failed to understand why the original was so effective, and the fear it explored. Much like the body horror subgenre, we see the destruction of the human body, the internal and external self, but in a different manner and for a different purpose. Body horror is a loss of identity, like what we see in The Fly, an extreme science fiction metaphor for aging or sickness, while possession horror is a supernatural approach, rooted in theological fear, to be wide open, unprotected. The belief of not just a metaphorical other, but an indiscernible evil, waiting to take advantage of a weakness. In today's video, we'll be diving into one of the first blockbusters to demystify its original purpose that got overshadowed by its own success, so we can understand why this possession horror movie worked and how that can inspire better explorations of this subgenre. Spoilers will follow.
How old are you?
12.
Is there someone inside you?
Sometimes.
When you first hear about The Exorcist, you think about Father Merrin coming out of the taxi as a shaft of light beckons his arrival among the darkness. Regan's horrendous distorted figure inhabited by the demon Pazuzu, twisting her head and projecting vomit on Father Karras. It's become iconic and seared into our shared zeitgeist, even for those who haven't seen it. After watching the film, you realize there is something more than the sensational practical effects and the free flow of bodily fluids. It's not a non-stop roller coaster of evocative imagery. For the most part, it's a very slow burn, building towards its supernatural scenes. The characters have ample space to develop, while the demon's influence is kept at a distance. The priest doesn't even set foot in the house until 3/4 of the movie. The iconic soundtrack is sparingly used, and the musical cues are a rarity. All of this is an effort to purposely ground the movie in a certain reality. The novel and screenwriter William Peter Blatty wanted the story to be more of a supernatural thriller than the horror movie we all know. That's why the movie is shot like a documentary. The lighting is generally unstylized and unassuming. The scenes can have little to no information given. Aspects of the story are not explained and kept a mystery. Scenes can begin and end unceremoniously. The color grade is almost bland, natural, and doesn't call attention to itself. Unlike the modern green-hued contrasty look that screams out this is a horror movie, what we see is a sober and at times cold look at the supernatural. The director and the writer wanted to imbue the abnormal into the mundane. The procedural approach is so the spiritual elements could be allowed to exist in our world. This effort stemmed from when Blatty had first heard of a real-life possession case that inspired him in his New Testament class in Georgetown. He wanted to retell it as a non-fiction account, but when he was unable to do so, he decided to write his own story, implementing certain creative liberties. It parallels the approach Robert Eggers later undertook when presenting the supernatural in The Witch, another example of storytelling realism. The events and dialogue were inspired and even borrowed from past accounts to tell a cinematic theological cautionary folktale, almost plucked from the 17th century. In the case of The Exorcist, it's a theological cautionary tale set in a modern time, middle-class America. Blatty was asked to shift the location from Georgetown to something spookier, like Salem, but he refused. The threat had to feel like it could happen where you least expected it, at any moment. No social class, culture, or lack of belief could spare you from this entity. It had to make you feel unprotected. For Blatty, the threat is real. He made the story realistic so anyone could perceive the unnatural the way he does.
What an excellent day for an exorcism.
You'd like that?
Intensely.
Mixing the mundane with the supernatural is but one of the many thematic and visual contrasts we can find in the story. Evidently, there's the dichotomy of good and evil, established from the very beginning. An ongoing ancient grand-scale struggle represented by Father Merrin, standing in front of the Pazuzu statue in an archaeological dig all the way in Iraq. Then we shift to a more metropolitan location, the wide shot zooming in onto the city, then narrowing onto the neighborhood, smaller still on the house, where this ancient spiritual conflict will take place. Again, underlining that a threat can happen anywhere and to anyone, even an innocent child. That's why the most important contrast is the corruption of Regan. It's not just the naturally striking visuals of a child monster, but the indiscriminate manner the demon exploits her. The disturbing scenes shock us more because she is a child. Her treatment feels unjustified and gratuitous, more so than if it was an adult. We share with the priest's confusion as to why this child. The other characters in the story encounter their own contrasts. A level-headed mother, far removed from superstition, confused by what she can see. The parade of doctors and psychologists baffled, as test after test only adds to their puzzlement. Ironically, they are the ones that propose the exorcism. A priest losing his faith and being very wary of the supernatural. The collective exhaustion of rational reasoning give credibility to the characters' desperate motivations they would have otherwise never had. The demon shares its own contrast, a cruel monster, but not a mindless beast. It can be disarmingly sardonic, and its actions, however seemingly random or unknowable, are indeed purposeful. Ultimately, contrast doesn't just serve to evoke an effect in the audience, but to create a conflict in the characters, a conflict of belief.
Why this girl doesn't make sense.
We can see two types of change in this story, the first being Regan's very apparent grotesque physical transformation, an almost dead-like uncanny appearance that no matter how unnatural, still retains some humanity. Regan is almost fully distorted, but there is just enough of her to remain recognizable, which makes her appearance feel even worse. It's not a malformed monster, it's a heavily tortured and scarred child. What gives her her demonic presence is certainly the voice, but most importantly the eyes. As we mentioned in our body horror video, one of the last things that were taken from Seth Brundle to show his final transformation was his eyes. It was the vestige of Seth's human intelligence and identity. In The Exorcist, Regan's identity is completely put in the back seat once we see the demon's green eyes, as described in the script when Father Karras visits her for the first time. It seems no longer Regan, but the demonic entity that now lies on the bed, turning head to stare at Karras. The eyes bulge in wasted sockets, shining with mad cunning, and burning intelligence seething in a face shaped in a hideous mask of evil. Even while being tied down, looking weak and close to death, just the eyes are enough to give off an abnormal sense of control and power. Our insight into Regan is closed off. If you notice, the perspective often followed in supernatural possession movies is not of the afflicted, but of the people surrounding them. Which brings us to the second change. Unlike body horror, there is a different kind of destruction of self going on in this movie. The real change the demon is trying to influence is that of the people around Regan. That's why the demon possessed the child, because destroying her life and prolonging the aberrant torture would ruin more lives than just the one. The little girl is not the target is we, the observer, everyone in the house. You're the target. The point is to make us despair. The real focus is on the effects Regan's possession has on Chris and Karras. As mentioned before, they are two characters in conflict, a non-believer desperate for someone to believe, and a believer reluctant to do so. By instilling and exploiting doubt, the demon can make them lose themselves. Body horror is about physical and mental detriment. The Exorcist's possession horror adds a spiritual one. A loss of belief can be its own loss of identity. We are composed of so many beliefs, but when we lose an important fundamental one that used to hold up our whole world, then we are left in our own private despair. Vladdy's writing turned into an attempt to explore his own spiritual wavering after the death of his mother, Father Karras serving as his surrogate. The character's uncertainty is his own. There was a period of time after my mother's death when I would describe my faith as more of an intense hope than a solidly held belief. It's in facing the demon where he reasserts his belief. Father Karras' selfless act of taking in the entity and dying in Regan's stead, someone he never actually met, transforms him into his own fulfillment of his faith. The Exorcist works because the story comes from someone's real private bouts. He wasn't trying to make a horror story with cheap weightless scares. He wanted to explore an irrational event in a plausible way, seeing how skeptical characters would act after having exhausted all reason against an unknown evil. An act of faith, that if there is darkness in the world, then that means there can be light. Thank you for taking the time to watch our exploration of possession horror in The Exorcist. Let us know what is your favorite use of possession in the movie. It doesn't need to be supernatural, it can also be in science fiction. We invite you to like, share, and subscribe if you still haven't done so yet, because honestly that helps us out a lot with the almighty algorithm. If you want to support our work, you can take a look at our slogan and Cosmic Horror t-shirts over at Bonfire. They compile all the orders and ship them out in 2 weeks. The spooky piano music you heard was made by Eduardo Gonzalez, and if you like his work, then please check out all his information down in the description. Until next time.